The idea for the versions of us came to me really quite suddenly. I woke up knowing that what I wanted to write next was the story of one couple's relationship played out in 3 different ways.
I became fascinated with Alaska, and that started me on the journey that became a novel. I read about this place, which is the last wilderness on our planet, where night lasts for 2 months. And I imagined a mother and daughter journeying into this perpetual night with the temperature dropping and an Arctic storm closing in.
I suppose the inspiration for In a Dark, Dark Wood was a conversation that I had with a friend. She said that she had never read a thriller set on a hen night, and I immediately thought, I really, really want to write this book.
It's like there's a jelly at the back of my head that starts to form, and it's the idea. And I always knew it was going to be an empty house. I thought it was going to be a succession of houses, like a chain, but I couldn't contain that, it was too big.
It can be quite difficult to get characters out of your head while you're writing a book, and particularly because Carter Blake tells so much of the story through his own eyes, you do tend to approach everyday life thinking, what would Carter Blake do in this situation?
Marvellous Ways came pretty formed. I wanted to write about an older woman, and she came with her name.
The idea for the book came from a news story. In 2011, a boy called Robin van Helsum appeared in Berlin saying that he had been living in the forest with his father in Germany. That was the inspiration. What if he really had lived in the woods?
I'd had this idea for more of a thriller, really, for quite some time, and I tried to write it before and hadn't really worked out at all. It was just something that took over, and I wrote it very quickly. It was a very intense process, and then when I sent it off to agents pretty much straight away, I had the most incredible response. It was just surreal.
Well, hello everybody, and another great read coming up on the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to W.H. Smith. So this week we're talking about The Samaritan by Mason Cross. Why did we pick that one?
Well, I picked it certainly because I love thrillers. I really do. And I love that particular kind of American thriller, although Mason Cross, as we discovered, is not American, but a Glaswegian. But he's got that whole, almost like that Lee Childs thing off pat.
Oh, yeah. Very Lee Childs, yeah.
It's a kind of, it's a story of a serial killer in America who's apparently, he's mutilating young women. The press call him the Samaritan because he poses as a helper when their cars break down. In effect, he then takes them, mutilates them and kills them. But the detective in charge recognises that this kind of serial killer has actually been operating for about 10 years in different parts of America. Yeah. And then this guy, Carter Blake, comes in, and he's a bit like the Jack Reacher.
He's like Jack Reacher, isn't he? Yeah.
Character in Lee Childs' books. He's this kind of freelance...
headhunter.
Well, crime solver, headhunter, with a strange background, and he always manages to catch the wrongdoers. Yeah. And I love that kind of thing. I just think it's a real classic American detective novel. And
if we hadn't met and interviewed the author, then I would have assumed automatically that he was American. I mean, because it has the authentic sort of American twang to the prose and to the dialogue. And it's just, we use this old hackneyed expression, but it's hackneyed because it's useful. It's a page turner. Yeah. I mean, you don't want the chapters to finish. You want to read just one more chapter before putting the light out. It's a cracking book.
And it doesn't matter that Mason Cross is a Glaswegian, because Lee Child is actually from Birmingham.
He's a Brummie, yeah.
Brought up in Coventry, although he lives in New York now. But so it's good to see British writers like that cashing in on this great American phenomenon of the violent thriller. And it's a really good book. Yeah.
Kelly kept a tight grip on the wheel and hunched forward, as though the extra 6 inches of proximity to the glass would make a shred of difference.
The Samaritan by Mason Cross.
She'd lived in LA for most of her life, and she could never remember it raining like this. The speedometer needle danced just above 20, which was as fast as she felt comfortable going with the steep drop to her right-hand side. Still, she'd been wondering if she should risk a little more pressure on the gas pedal, bring it up to 30 perhaps. She was worried about another car coming up behind her, not having time to stop. Somebody less cautious, somebody going way too fast. You'd have to be nuts to be speeding a road like this, on a night like this, but that was the thing. People go crazy. She She compromised and allowed the needle to climb to 25. She breathed rapidly through her nose and tried not to blink. Mulholland was a strange road, built a long time ago for a lot less traffic. It wound past the homes of the stars, but also into darker, rural patches that felt like the precise middle of nowhere. Lots of sudden twists next to steep drops. Kelly wasn't overly familiar with the road under the best of circumstances, but tonight she might as well have been on the other side of the planet. It already seemed like hours since she'd left Sloane's. She risked a glance at the clock on the dash and realised that it had only been 25 minutes. The idea for Carter Blake, I knew when I was writing The Killing Season that the hero had to be somebody that was skilled in finding people who don't want to be found. So I started to think about what sort of person, what sort of background someone would have to have those skills to track down the very particular villain that I had in this story. And I came up with somebody who has quite a mysterious background, but details of that background are filled in gradually through the first book and the second book, and particularly in the forthcoming third book. And it's been good to find out more about the character of Carter Blake as I write the books, and I hope it will be fun for the reader to find out more as they read. When I was thinking about creating the character of Carter Blake, I knew I wanted him to be able to run through a series of books, and so I very consciously made him a character that wasn't tied down to one particular location. He doesn't have one employer. He can basically go wherever he wants to, and that background gave me a lot of freedom to develop the book and think about subsequent books and drop them into different types of adventures. It can be quite difficult to get characters out of your head while you're writing a book, and particularly because Carter Blake tells so much of the story through his own eyes, you do tend to approach everyday life thinking, what would Carter Blake do in this situation? So quite often my wife will say, well, you know, Carter Blake would know what to do when you're lost driving, for example. So it's sometimes difficult to live up to how efficient and how prepared Carter Blake is in real life, but it does tend to occupy your mind as you're writing. For me, there's never been a time where I didn't want to be a writer. It's always been a fundamental thing. When I was in primary school, I always used to love writing stories and creative writing assignments, and my teachers always used to write in my reports that I was good at writing, but I tended to daydream in class, and I think that the two were probably related. In my teenage years, I started to write more short stories, and it was when I was in my late 20s I decided just to sit down and have a go at writing a book. And I just thought, you know, even if it never gets published, if it sits in a drawer for the rest of my life, at least I will have written a book, and that will be one of my ambitions ticked off.
You're guaranteed to get the best books and the best deals when you choose the Richard and Judy Book Club titles from WH Smith. They come with exclusive bonus content, including this informative podcast.
Well, welcome to another mini edition of the Richard and Judy Book Club, and here we are talking about a fabulous novel called The Samaritan by Mason Cross. Not his real name, but we will hide his true identity. It's a classic wolf in sheep's clothing story, this. It's almost a fairy tale for our times. The ironically named Samaritan is, in fact, a ruthless killer. He preys on lone female drivers who've broken down at the roadside. Now, at first, LAPD detectives think they're up against a new monster on the block. And then they start to realise that these slayings have been going on across America for years. And it seems that only mysterious freelance manhunter Carter Blake can stop the killings. It's completely gripping, and the author's here now. Why do you use a false name, by the way?
That was actually my agent's idea. When we went out to, with my original book, the Killing Season, on submission, he suggested right before that process that it would be good to have an American-sounding name for my
Mason
American
Cross.
So yeah, I came up with a few suggestions, and Mason Cross won. It helps because Cross is near the start of the alphabet, and if you've ever looked at the C section in a bookshop, you'll notice that all the crime authors are there.
I didn't know
Christie,
that.
Chandler, Michael Conley, Lee Child. So it's a good place to be.
That's a fact of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a bit like, did you know that all watch adverts, the watches are always set at 10 past 10? You'll notice it from now on. I'll notice the C's in the shops. All right, let's just give us a quick, I've given us a short sort of skimming of the plot there, but just tell us a bit more about what's going on in this story.
Yeah, the story, as you've said, the LAPD are on the trail of what they think is a new serial killer, who the media dubbed the Samaritan. And this comes to the attention of Carter Blake, who is a freelance manhunter. He's in the middle of a case on the other side of the country, and some of the details of the case make him realise that he might know who the killer is. And it turns out that he used to work with the killer some time ago in his mysterious past.
Yes.
And that tells him that he's really the only person that stands a chance of tracking this guy down, but that isn't necessarily going to be without consequences for...
So he inserts himself into the police operation?
Yes.
Yes. Which is very well written, because at first they don't want to give him the time of day.
Yeah.
Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? But then it turns out he comes with credentials and recommendations. An FBI colleague says, what does he say? I trust my life with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets his in.
What? So, I mean, you're a Glaswegian.
Good guess.
You're writing about America, LA, and the rest of the country. What was the sort of little spark in your head that made you decide to bring Carter to life and in America?
I think, the reason for going with this kind of American thriller, it really is what I like to read. And I think, a lot of people ask, why did you decide to write books set in America? But I almost think that writers don't choose what they're going to write. I think they gravitate towards what they respond to themselves. And I've always been a big fan of American thrillers from Chandler and Hammett up to the present day, with guys like Michael Connelly and James Ellroy. Yeah.
So do you like the Jack Reacher novels?
Yes, I love Jack Reacher,
great,
and I was really pleased that Lee Child gave me a quote for the first book, The Killing Season. So he liked that, and that was a massive compliment, because I'm a big fan of Lee's. And given that he's not actually American, that gave me the confidence
Lee
to
Child,
give it a go.
He lives there now, though, doesn't he?
Yes.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I sort of visited America a number of occasions, and I sort of love New York. I love the West Coast, so it'd be nice to spend some more time
Live
there.
the dream.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to the plot. As I think I might have said in our online review of this book, what struck me about it was it's in a kind of a classic genre of road killers. And as a society, whether it's in America or here, we seem to have a fascination with them. Whether it's Dick Turpin, the highwayman, who was a killer as well as a thief, Sawney Bean, who is a Scotsman you've probably heard of, the cannibal who patrolled the road to Stranraer. We have this fascination with this idea of danger when we set out on a lonely road, particularly at night. Was that something you consciously tapped into?
Yeah, I think so, or maybe unconsciously. And I think there's something interesting about that in-between space that you inhabit when you are travelling. And in fact, the place where I got the idea for the book, it was driving on country roads outside of Glasgow, and just being in this space that was within full view of a city of 1 million people and all the lights, but being in this really isolated, lonely road. And I noticed a breakdown when I was out there and thought, that wouldn't be a great situation to be in if the wrong person offers
Because
help.
what you do really well in the book is it happens in a heartbeat when one breaks down. 1 minute you're in a 21st century environment, you're listening to your CDs, you're listening to the radio, you're in a sort of air-conditioned car, and the next it packs up on you and it grinds to a halt at the side of the road in a lonely spot, and within the space of a couple of seconds you're back almost in the Stone Age. Nothing's working. You're getting cold because the heating's not working. You're stuck, you're lonely, and you're vulnerable. And I thought that was very cleverly done in the book, using those moments to kind of communicate fear and the need for help. Yeah. And the way the Samaritan comes and is very believable in his offerings. Why did you make him such a sadist? He doesn't just kill. He really enjoys the process.
That's a good question. I think in the first book, the villain, I almost thought he was too likeable. And people tended to come back and say, I really like...
Don't introduce me to your friends.
People tend to come back and say in some cases, they like the villain more than the hero. So I wanted, I guess, to delineate the bad guy a bit more in this one and make him somebody you really wanted to root against. And I have to say, I had much less fun writing the Samaritan than some of my other villains.
Why?
So
because you liked him less?
Yes, and as you say, as a sadist, he has no redeeming features. He's not a nice guy, and he's not somebody you want to be picking you up.
That must be quite hard, actually. If you're not, I guess just from meeting you this once, that you're a kind of quite a gentle, mild-mannered man. You certainly speak like one. How do you? The sadistic scenes. I often wonder this about real crime thriller novelists. They're almost always male, although of course, there's
Patricia
Patricia.
Patricia Cornwall, yeah.
Patricia Cornwall, yeah. But apart from her, and she is a trained forensic pathologist, how do you kind of get into all that? Do you kind of think of really horrific scenes in your head?
I wonder if it's a really strange form of therapy, and I think you're right, and it's crime writers as a bunch are really lovely people. You'll have met loads yourself, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's just that we're exercising those darker impulses on the page, and perhaps if we didn't do this, we might not be as nice and gentle people.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've introduced you to the Samaritan. He's here with us today. What about the process of the writing? It's intricately plotted, obviously, and it's very plot dependent. I mean, you can't really go off-piste with stories like this. You have to follow a very clear line, beginning, middle and end. Do you do that before you write? Do you have just a broad arc of the plot, or do you have it all worked out well in advance before you put...
It's kind of a mixture. I try and fool myself into thinking I know everything that's going to happen, but I always know it will change as I write, because as I actually get in close and write the individual chapters, I'll always come up with better ideas for how I could do things.
Right.
I will always think, actually, wouldn't it be quite good
if this happened?
Yes. So I always give myself permission to wander off-piste, but it's good to have a structure.
And do you, as we've been hearing from other writers in this particular series, interestingly, do you find that you, if you have an idea, if a thought suddenly bubbles into your head, you have to write it down then and there? Because if you don't, it leaves you, it escapes you.
Yes, I try never to be without a notebook, or at least my phone, because sometimes great ideas just appear to you and you have to
get it down, or you forget
in case it disappears.
And how long did it take you to write this one, for example?
This one was written fairly quickly. The first book, again, you'll hear this from all authors, but you have all the time in the world to write your first novel because nobody's waiting for it. The second one, it transfers from being a hobby to being a job. So you've got a deadline and you have somebody waiting for the book. So it took me about 6 months to turn around that one, which was sort of fairly fast compared to the first one. But I think there was something to be said for having a deadline, having to work out.
I couldn't agree more. I need a deadline. There's a very good twist at the end. Was that with you all the way through, or did you come to that?
No, that was not with me all the way through. That actually came in the second draft, I think.
Really?
And
that late?
It was weird, because when I went back, after I'd decided to change that particular element without giving anything away, when I went back through it, it was almost like I'd been seeding that in the book. I could see where it came from. So.
How interesting. Interesting. Well, it's fascinating talking to you. The book, as we say, is The Samaritan. The author is Mason Cross, except he isn't. He's somebody else, but anyway, that's the name that he's going with, and it's a good American name. It works very well. Thank you, Mason, once again. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Another thriller writer. Great. No, really great. I love them.
I'm reading Spool of Blue Thread. I'm really enjoying the book. I'm enjoying all the characters. I like the twists and turns, I like the secrets, and I have a funny feeling that there are a lot more secrets to come out. I like the fact that they appear just like a normal family, appear all to be hugely dysfunctional characters, which makes for an interesting read.
If I go into a bookshop, the normal book I look for is a classical novel, so these are quite different to my normal reading, and has opened my eyes to new authors.
I like quite a variety of books. I often look at crime and drama, thrillers, those kind of books, and also ones like A Spool of Blue Thread that's got a family saga through it, but interesting ones.
From the Richard and Judy Book Club, I'm going to read A Man Called Ove by Frederick Beckman, and I want to read this because it sounds quite funny that he's the grumpiest man in the world, doesn't like anybody. It sounds like the kind of story that's going to be a lot of fun, and I want something fun to read.
Well, we come back from stateside and we go a bit more domestic on the next edition when we welcome Jenny Eclair's latest title to our book club shelves. You up to speed? Here we go.
Have you read it, by the way?
Of course we have.
Just checking.
It's our book club, you know, our name's on the table.
I didn't know whether you'd had a short list, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
It's our job, it's what we do.
Join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter, or on our blog, whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy.